Let's go live. Thank you. We're live. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is 7:05. This is the Housing and Real Property Subcommittee. We have several bills to discuss today. HB 449, 755, 872, and for discussion only 673 and 292. With that, let us begin with HB 449. Ben, if you would please give us a brief overview of HB 449, Ben, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair Holmes. HB 449, condominiums, property insurance deductibles, and unit owner responsibility is the title. It's cross-filed with Senate Bill 446. There's no fiscal impact. It's favorable testimony. There's one favorable with amendment from the Maryland Realtors, requesting that notice of the deductible be included in the resale documents. That's reflected in the amendment you should have received. The bill increases from 10,000 to 25,000, the maximum amount of the condo's property insurance deductible that a unit owner is responsible for if damage to the condominium originates from the owner's unit. It's based on an overall hardening of the insurance market.
And let's discuss right now the amendment first. And the amendment, which was suggested by, as Ben said, the Association of Realtors, that this minimum insurance requirement be added to the resale package. For those who are not aware, when you purchase a home in a common ownership community, uh, you are provided with all of the accounting documents, which includes the reserve study requirements, and you're also required to have in there your governing documents, etc. If your real estate agent does not provide that to you, you have 5 days after contract to rescind that contract because it's not in the resale package. I think it's a good idea to have this insurance requirement in the resale package. Therefore, I consider this a friendly amendment.
Oh, friendly.
If I can get in a motion on the amendment, I certainly would appreciate it.
Move the amendment.
There's a motion, and did Delegate Baker make a second on that motion?
Second, Celebrity.
Celebrity, very good.
And we have Delegate Allen joining us now.
Oh, fantastic. Any questions on the amendment? Seeing no questions on the amendment, all in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposition to the amendment? Any abstentions? Therefore, the amendment carries. Now we have HB 449 before us as amended, and I saw a hand.
Move the bill.
Oh, there's a motion to move. Is there a second on the bill?
Second.
There's a motion and a second as amended on HB 449. Are there any questions on HB 449? Hearing none, all in favor of HB 449 as amended signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposition? Any abstentions? Seeing none, HB 449 will receive a favorable report from Housing and Real Property. Let us now go to HB 755. Ben, if you could give us an overview of that, I certainly would appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Chair Holmes. The title of the bill is Common Ownership Communities, Recreational Common Areas, Sensitive Information as Condition for Access. It's cross-filed with Senate Bill 540. There's no fiscal impact. The testimony is all favorable, except for one favorable with amendment from an individual asking to include medical records with this. The bill is for each common ownership community type, condos, co-ops, and HOAs. And what it does is prohibit these common ownership communities from requiring certain sensitive information for members, owners, occupants, or their guests, or children from accessing or using a recreational common area. The type of sensitive information includes things like birth certificate, national origin, religious beliefs.
Thanks, Ben. I think that the way that the bill is crafted is pretty clean. I'm not so sure we necessarily need that amendment to add medical information. Is there any discussion from the committee members in reference to that suggested amendment? If we have it,
Why do you need that?
that's exactly what I'm suggesting, Delegate Siliberti.
And Chair Holmes, we have Delegate Long with his hand raised.
Oh, I'm sorry, I couldn't see that. Delegate Long, I'm sorry, I couldn't see your hand. I'm sorry, sir.
No problem. Mr. Chair, I normally don't make fuss on many bills in subcommittee. I'm not sure if I'm trying to recall, so if people can help me out, I really apologize. I believe that the delegate was amenable to that being included within there, and she didn't have heartburn about it. I know this may sound too specific. I just think it would be helpful if it is in there. I think it's being proactive and just ensuring that we don't have to come back and address that at a later time. I do believe that it could come a time where people would ask for medical information if there's a condition, somebody they don't want to be held liable, whatever reason, right? I don't know.
Okay.
That's
Yeah,
my
and I appreciate that. That's why we're having a discussion. You know, Ben, do you recall any comments from the sponsor of the bill relevant to that suggested amendment?
Nothing more than what's been characterized already. I think they seemed open, not opposed. Yeah.
Well, Delegate Long, hang on a second here. I see the Attorney General has her hand up. Perhaps the Attorney General's office can shed some light on this. Ms. Strawn, can you shed some light on this suggested amendment?
Yes, I actually spoke to the delegate and she said that she had no problem with that being included.
Okay. All right. I appreciate that additional information. That's information that I did not have. I appreciate that. That goes in concert with Delegate Long is suggesting. And Delegate Long, are you making a motion for this amendment?
I will. Yes, I'm fine.
Okay.
I make the motion.
I'll second.
Did someone second it?
Yeah, this is Delegate Stewart. I'll second.
That is great. The amendment adds the medical information to the list of things that cannot be requested in terms of the recreational facilities condition for access. There's a motion and a second. Any
Wait a minute, hold it.
question? I'm sorry, go ahead, Chiliberti.
Yeah, would you repeat that in terms of what was not added or what was added rather?
Sure.
The medical?
Yeah, Ben, if you could read that amendment, that'd be greatly helpful with the medical scenario added to the list of items that cannot be requested.
Sure, Chair Holmes. I'm looking at the testimony here. It's a one sentence. It says, please include medical information or records in the list of sensitive information.
And that is
Individual.
that is the amendment in its totality. Delegate
The
Silver.
medical is going to be included in the sensitive information?
That is correct. Something that cannot be requested.
You cannot request my medical or your medical?
Either one, yeah. Cannot request mine or yours. Cannot request medical records at all.
Okay, I got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any,
If I may interject, Delegate Boyce had some issues with her mic and wanted to log off and log back on, but she had a question that she wanted to weigh in on. And we have Delegate Healy joining us now.
So Delegate Boyce had a question on the
On the bill, but her mic wasn't working, so she's gonna try logging off and logging back on.
Okay.
Okay, I'm here now.
Delegate Boyce is here as well.
Delegate Boyce is here also?
Yes, she's logging on now, sir.
All right, is this already going public? Are we already?
Yes. We're on HB 755 now, the
Okay,
second
thank you.
bill. Let me know, MJ, when you can see Delegate Boyce. I'm going
She is
through.
present. All members are present.
Okay. Delegate Boyce?
Sir,
Yes. Yes. MJ indicated that you had a question on 755.
I did not. I was on and then my computer lost sound and after testing it didn't work, so I just restarted.
Oh, okay.
That was my issue. I'm sorry.
That's okay. To catch you and Delegate Healy up to speed, we have an amendment that's been motioned and seconded on HB 755. The amendment is to add medical records onto the list of items that cannot be requested in terms of sensitive information for access to recreational facilities. That amendment has been motioned and seconded. Are there any questions on that amendment? Seeing no questions on that amendment, all in favor of that amendment signify by saying aye.
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 Any objections or to that amendment?
I have to abstain. I didn't hear the amendment at all, so don't worry about it.
Okay. All in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any objections? And we do have one abstention. Now we're on HB 755 as amended. Is there
Move
Bills
to
amended.
motion is favorable and seconded. Any questions on HB 755 as amended? Seeing none, all in favor of HB 755 as amended, signify by saying aye.
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 Any abstentions or opposition to HB 755 as amended? Seeing none, HB 755 as amended will receive a favorable report from the Housing and Real Property Subcommittee. Let us now go to HB 872. Ben, if you could give us some information on this one, on what this bill does, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, your Holmes. The title of the bill is Residential Real Property, Tenants' Right of First Refusal. There's no fiscal impact. It's cross-filed with Senate Bill 606. Testimony is all favorable. This is a clarifying bill that makes a correction to the Renters' Rights and Stabilization Act of 2024. That bill last year established a right of first refusal for tenants. Generally, before a transfer of title to a residential rental property can occur, the tenant must have the right of first refusal to purchase the property. The right of a third party to purchase any residential rental property is subject to that right. And so what the bill does is clarify the circumstances under which the liability for failing to comply with that requirement to purchase a residential property is restricted to the owner of the property and does not attach to the property. So what it does is it replaces tenant with third party to make that clarifying change.
And there are no amendments on this, as I recall, Ben, is that correct?
That's correct.
And this bill, HB 872, is clearly clarifying from previous legislation that we enacted before. And this is just clarifying some language in there that seemed to have caused some confusion. Again, this is clearly a clarifying legislation.
Mr. Chair, can I move the bill?
That is great. Is there a second? And,
Second.
there's a motion and a second on HB 872. Any questions on HB 872? Seeing none, all in favor of HB 872 signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposition to HB 872?
No.
There's one, Delegate Baker. Okay.
Abstain.
Okay, there's two, Ciliberti and Baker. Any other objections? Seeing none, all in favor of HB 872 signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
We already did that. Objections, we had two of them.
No,
so-
Marvin, check
Yes.
with Barry. I thought he said abstain.
No, I changed my mind.
Okay, there you go. I was listening, Barry.
Good.
So we have Baker and Ciliberti are in opposition, which means HB 872 receive a favorable report from the subcommittee.
What was the vote again?
It is,
That's not a hard question.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6-2.
The two. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Let us now go to HB 673. And this one, we're going to have discussion only on HB 673. And Ben, if you could give us an update, give us a description on HB 673, I certainly would appreciate it.
Okay, the title of the bill is Condominiums and Homeowners Associations, Governing Documents, Electric Vehicle Recharging Equipment. There's no cross-file, there's no fiscal impact. The testimony was favorable generally, including from the Maryland Energy Administration. There were 2 favorable with amendment. What the bill does is outlaw prohibitions or unreasonable restrictions by a condo or an HOA on the installation of EV recharging equipment in parking spaces that are common use or limited common use. Sometimes my understanding is that the existing restrictions, covenants, or in the governing documents are particularly restrictive of that. So that's what this bill is trying to address. The common use and limited common use parking spaces refers to the communities that don't actually assign parking spaces, or there are parking spaces that are not assigned. So like visitor parking or just general parking for the community. It includes a requirement that the installation of EV recharging equipment be subject to the normal budget processes. That was based on feedback from Montgomery County's housing body last session with this bill. It requires the governing body to consider the availability of sufficient parking spaces for the community before installing EV recharging equipment. And it also says that the governing body may grant a license for up to 3 years, renewable at the discretion of the body, on common elements that are necessary for the EV equipment. It applies retroactively to these recorded covenants or restrictions. And then the testimony for the favorable with amendment, HOA United was asking that I checked with the sponsor about the amendments. They were not interested in adding them to this bill, but would be considering them in the future, they advised. The HOA United testimony is asking that they recommend limiting the board's ability to assess owners for capital improvements to 1% or less of the annual budget, unless a majority of owners approve expenses in excess of that. And then there was additional testimony from an individual that was saying they should require any modification to EV charging sites to involve proper communication with affected residents and property owners. I think that's somewhat addressed by the normal budget processes of the condo. It's also the testimony here is also asking that there be ongoing maintenance and operational accountability. And they wanted to prevent HOAs or condos from dismantling or disabling installed EV charging stations without a compelling justification.
And ladies and gentlemen, the reason why I wanted to have this for discussion purposes only, because I want us to digest those suggested amendments, of which all of us have. There also was something in the language that said, as I recall, requiring parking for the taking into account the community. And I'm assuming that the word community means just the common ownership community. But I just wanted to clarify on that as well. But I want to have this for discussion only for today. So does anyone have anything that they want to bring up on this bill for our discussion purposes? Next week, we're going to vote on it, but I wanted to make sure we had ample time to digest the content of this legislation.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
just out of curiosity, when they talk about recharging equipment, do you have a price tag on that?
I do not have, I guess, for example, a price tag on the EV charging stations would depend a lot upon the framework of the electrical capacity within the particularly the condo, whether it needs to have a revitalized panel system. Also, it would depend upon the distance from the building to where the EV charging stations are going to be located. If they have to go underground in a parking area, et cetera, obviously that cost goes up. And that is probably one of the reasons why there was that suggested amendment of that percentage increase by the HOA United. A good question, which is why I wanted to have this discussion prior to taking a vote. Any additional questions on this one? Again, this is discussion only.
Mr. Chairman, just if I remember, and because I stayed in the committee, I don't have my bills with me. I'm so sorry.
I don't have the amendments either.
Sorry.
Okay.
Go
ahead.
I just want to, this is the, I want to make sure I have the right bill.
673.
I'm sorry.
673.
Oh yeah, no, I don't have the right bill. This would allow me as a potential owner to install a potential where's the word I'm looking for? Charging
Equipment.
port or whatever. If I wanted, but it would keep the homeowners and the condominium associations from not allowing me to do so, and especially if I'm paying for it myself.
No.
This is the wrong bill.
Ben.
Hold on, let me just open this.
Yes, Chairman.
This is this bill is this EV charging station being applied or being installed at the request of an owner, or are these EV charging stations being put into common elements and limited common elements as a function for everyone in the community? I think
So,
Yep.
Go ahead.
Okay, so yes, what the bill's doing is it's not the best way maybe to think about this is what it's doing is that in subsection B here of the bill, as like one example on page 2, it says a recorded covenant or restriction, the declaration or the bylaws or the rules may not prohibit or unreasonably restrict the governing body from installing them. It's not requiring them to be installed. It's not
right. It just keeps them from keeping me from potentially having the option to do so without them being like, well, we don't want it, or I may be the only one who wants it. But it keeps them from
prohibiting you to do that.
Yeah, I have a question too.
Okay. I think I'm done.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Go ahead.
My question is about if they're the provision about them, do they have to keep them? I mean, if if they're no longer functional, are they obligated to repair them? Can they have them removed?
Well,
Um,
I think the way that the legislation is written is that there's a 3-year renewal period in the legislation. Ben, can you expand upon that, please?
That's right, Chair Holmes. They provide for that's for the common elements. They say that the governing body may grant a license up to 3 years at the discretion of the governing body. It can be renewed on any common element necessary for the installation of equipment or for the supply of electricity. And then the definition for EV recharging equipment is based on an existing law that's in the bill or that's in the code. And it means property that's used for recharging vehicles propelled by electricity. So I think it's a pretty broad term for what EV recharging equipment could be. I think like in the parking garage, in the house building, you might see people with, using like an outlet or something like that, but it could be, more involved as well. So some flexibility, I think. Yeah.
And as part, if I could add, as part of the negotiation to purchase and install, when you contract for this, there are contractual items that ask the governing body their renewable timeframes, short-term, mid-term, or long-term. That is part of what you look at in your contract with these persons that install it. The renewable period that's in the legislation.
and maintenance, and so that they can they stay functional? Because that
Yes.
seems to be a big problem, except for Tesla. For all the others, you lots of places you go to plug something in and it's not working.
Yes, yeah, and that's right. I agree. Yeah.
Chair Holmes, if I may, Delegate Stewart has had his hand raised.
Oh, I
And
couldn't
we have
see him.
an
I mean-
advocate of the bill, Scott Silverman, has his hand raised to offer additional clarity.
Who was that?
Scott Silverman.
Okay. Let's go to Delegate Stewart first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yeah, I was just gonna say, I think actually the bill is like much more mundane than the way we've been talking about it so far. It just basically prohibits blanket bans on the charging equipment in the bylaw. So it doesn't say that they actually have to accept it. It doesn't say that they have to allow these things. They just can't have a blanket ban. They just can't say, okay, in the bylaws, we hereby say we don't like it because we just don't like EVs. Sorry. Like it's just basically making these condos actually take this installation on a case-by-case basis, like any reasonable condo board would do. And the bill puts in the various safeguards. It says like they have to consider parking before they even allow this. It says they basically like should take into account their own budget before they purchase any of these things. So it doesn't make them, if someone doesn't have the money for it, it doesn't make them build it. If there's not enough parking, it doesn't make them authorize someone to build their own. Nothing like that. It's way more mundane. It just says condos and HOAs can't just have an unreasonable blanket ban writ large. And this is the same thing we do for solar panels on rooftop. In fact, that was the topic of HB4, which the subcommittee passed out a couple weeks ago, and which I think now we've passed out as a full House of Delegates now for the second or third time in a year in a row. So that is the same language. It basically just says that HOA and condo cannot unreasonably restrict or basically have a.
Well, he's frozen. Yeah, and since Delegate Stewart is frozen, let me pick up where he left off. Yeah, that bill HB4, that unreasonable restriction that we struck out was based upon 5% of the cost and 10% of the 10% of the electrical increase in charging that was available. So Delegate Stewart is correct, is doing the same kind of thing that we did with HB4. I'm sorry he froze up there on us. What I'm going to do now is briefly turn to Scott Silverman to give us some additional information. Mr. Silverman?
Yes, thank you, Delegate Holmes. I want, for the benefit of the members of the committee, the major thrust of HB 673 is to allow individual owners to request the installation of EV charging equipment in parking spaces over which they do not have exclusive control or ownership. There is already legislation on the books, which you all adopted. If my memory serves, I think it was either 22 or 23, which gives owners the right already to have individual EV charging stations in parking spaces over which they do have ownership and control.
Right.
However, when it comes to a commonly owned parking space, such as what we're talking about here, the law would otherwise, the law would otherwise say that the condo cannot give an individual owner ownership or exclusive control over a commonly owned space without giving them a license, which is the reason for the license provisions. And the reason they need to be there is because 11-125, pardon me, of the Condo Act would otherwise limit the board to 1-year licenses. And the thought was that because of the investment in EV equipment, a 3-year license was more reasonable than a 1-year license. So that's why they extended it to 3 years and included that specific provision. So this is really the companion to a bill that you passed a couple of years ago to cover the other side of the coin, so to speak, to allow EV charging equipment in common element areas where the owner would not have already exclusive control or ownership. With regard to maintenance, however, the way I read the bill, because an individual owner is asking for the installation and would get a license to the space, they would be responsible for maintenance, repair, and replacement, and the costs associated with that, even though it is in a common element space.
Thank you, Mr.
I hope
Silverman.
that helped.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. All right, ladies and gentlemen, time is running out here. I'm going to add, and this is for discussion only, and let's move on to the last one, HB 292. And Ben, let's just make sure we get all of these amendments of 673 out to everyone. Let's go to 292. There are a lot of amendments on HB 292. And Ben, can you talk about this one? If you would please, Ben, this is reserve studies, ladies and gentlemen. And you've all heard a lot about this in multiple years. Ben?
Okay. Thank you, Chair Holmes. Yes, HB 292 concerns reserve studies and reserve funding. It is cross-filed with Senate Bill 63. Let's see, there's no fiscal notes. You, Chair Holmes, have worked on some amendments for the bill, which I can also go through in conjunction with going through the bill, if that sounds good.
Please.
Okay. And the amendments are based on general improvements, advocate feedback that we've received. So I'll share my screen now. Sending a request to share.
Request to share. MJ.
Okay, thank you. So there are three common ownership community types that are addressed in this bill: condominiums, cooperative housing corporations, and the last one here is homeowners associations. The changes mirror each ownership type in the bill. So it'll probably be, for efficiency's sake, best to just look at one of them because the language, again, is going to be mirrored for each one. The homeowners association one, which part of the bill begins in 11B, 11.2.2 here, if everyone can see okay. This section is the section about what the budget needs to include. The first part here is the first amendment that's being made to the bill is deleting language here about how reserves are going to be including replacement costs if the estimated replacement cost is greater than 10,000. The basis for that is because it could be misinterpreted as setting a floor for reserves for each individual element. And that's not going to be necessary for the homeowners associations for a single element. It would just be confusing, and accordingly it was removed. The next part we have about the funding level for each common ownership community type. For HOAs here, it says that in subsection D1 on line 5, how the reserves provided for in the annual budget shall be the funding amount recommended in the most recent reserve study or the updated reserve study. That's going to be subject, though, to paragraph 2 there on line 13, which concerns the ramp-up period, which is giving these communities 5 fiscal years following their initial reserve study to attain the reserve funding level. HOA United suggested that that be 10 years, I believe, but I think most of the consensus we've received has been for 5 years, which is the existing part of the bill there. There's another component that's being added to the bill, which is pictured in paragraph 3 on line 18 of page 14 here. What this is doing is we talked about the reserve funding levels that are required based on the reserve study. However, as you can see in 3 subparagraph I here, the governing body can determine by a 2/3 majority vote that the association and the lot owners in this instance, but it would be condos and unit owners and the other ones, and same terminology for cooperative housing corporations. If the governing body determines that there's a financial hardship, they can limit reserves, and that can subject to a time limitation. If they make that hardship determination, they can reasonably deviate from the reserve funding requirement that we just talked about, based on what's indicated in the reserve study. However, the funding level under that requirement needs to at least be the amount necessary for the purposes specified in 11B112.3 F3, which is the provision that concerns the essential purposes of reserves, such as things that provide for health and safety, structural integrity, and essential functioning. So things like structural systems, roofs, if it's sewer, that is a reserve expense that would be included, and anything else that is determined by the governing body to be an essential purpose. So that is, as opposed to just requiring all reserve funding across the board, it gives these HOAs, these common ownership communities, they can determine if they have a financial hardship, they can reasonably deviate and are only required to fund those critical elements. There's a renewal period here, which it lasts for 1 fiscal year following that determination, and it can be renewed. They can also renew that and extend it. The next part of the bill, there were concerns that could be abused or misapplied. However, I would just add that again, the language is pretty clear about the funding level that is going to be required, and that funding level is what is for those essential purposes. The next smaller part is making some clarifying changes in paragraph 4 here on line 10. This was based on testimony we received on the bill from a number of advocates. It's a clarifying change that's being made. What it does is make sure that the homeowners association in this example is reviewing their reserves and the reserve study to make sure that that's adequate. And it also adds clarification that review does not need to be an additional reserve study. This was the testimony is from Miller Dodson, reserve specialist, as well. CAI's testimony for this bill was focused on this. They felt that accuracy was undefined. They were also concerned that the burden shouldn't be on the COC members, although I think the way the language is drafted right now, it could be said that it's understood that the HOA could, they're required to it, but they could use hire somebody to conduct that review if they determine necessary. They would still be effectuating the purpose of that requirement. The next part, this is section 11B 112.3 on line 16 here. This is about the definition for the reserve study. What the language you're seeing that's being added about what the reserve study is doing is right now the reserve study requires the identification of the structural, mechanical, electrical, plumbing components, and any other components. What the added language is doing is allowing more flexibility for the common ownership communities. The common ownership communities take a lot of different sizes, and the added language, some larger COCs might choose to they might choose that they might have an operating budget that provides for these smaller expenses, so they don't need to fund every single common expense out of the reserves if it's below a floor that is set by the homeowners association in this case, and it's based on their expenses, which again speaks to the size of the HOA as well as something or a minor expense. Moving forward, the next part is just a clarifying change based on some additional testimony. Not all reserve components or elements are going to be measured by square footage. So it could be so that's why the word quantity is used of each identified component, and it requires the appropriate measurement. So some things might be square footage, piping might be cubic feet, and that's what that language is doing. Paragraph 3 here is just making updated technical corrections to the reserve study language. Let's see. And then there's one additional change here about to the existing law for how the section applies to homeowners association. They're setting the floor at 10,000 for HOAs because some HOAs may have common expenses that are below 10,000 if they don't have any property that's shared in that manner. So think about something like their only expense could be their welcome sign to the homeowners association, but that could be it, in which case this reserve study requirement wouldn't apply to them. It is making a clarifying change, though, that it is for repair and replacement. Initial purchase and installation isn't really what the best way to describe what a reserve is used for, which again is repair and replacement. And just a couple of more technical changes here. We are removing the word fully in paragraph F of line 24 there, because it's not that you're doing the full funding for each reserve or each common element. What you're making sure you're doing is you're funding in accordance with the funding plan and the various methods that are generally accepted accounting principles. So that's why they use that. That's why that language is being struck, that word fully, because it could be misinterpreted. And then the similar technical corrections based on the terminology for the accounting practices. And this, again, was what was mentioned earlier. That was the last point, just about how they the funding plan for these types of common elements are going to just be, if you're pursuing a financial hardship determination, you still have to fund health, safety, and well-being, and 3 Roman 1, structural integrity in Roman 2, essential functioning in Roman 3, and any other critical purpose as determined by the governing body. So thank you for all of that. And yep.
And that, you see, that's the reason why I wanted to have this also as a discussion item, because there's quite a bit to it.
Yeah, right.
And uh, you know, I wanted to make sure that we all had an opportunity to read through it because there's quite a bit to it. Any questions right now on all of this that we just discussed on HB 292?
Mr. Chair, I just want to say thank you and thank Ben for really going through this so that it is is clarifying and that those who are part of these different COCs understand what their actual requirement is versus what they think their requirement is. And hopefully to the point I know we often talk about is that when they're when they're advised by others that they can always go back to this bill and say, actually, no, what they're being advised to do or how to move forward or how to fund reserve studies or what should be in reserve studies not is clearly outlined in this bill. So I just thank you guys for your work.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, we did take a little bit of time to go through this, and I want to thank Ben also for his many, many hours in putting all this together for us. Delegate Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I just wanted to see what Scott had to say, if that's all right.
Sure, Mr. Silverman.
Thank you, Delegate Holmes. I just had a couple questions. First, thank you very much for extending the ramp-up period from 3 years to 5 years. I know we tried to do that last year. We didn't cross the finish line, so I definitely appreciate your efforts to marshal this through again this year. And it is our hope and expectation that this bill will become the model that everybody can coalesce around. As you're aware, there are 4 other bills out there potentially competing with you, and I understand you're going to whip everybody into shape. But I did have a couple questions, maybe more for Ben than for you, but substituting adequacy for accuracy, is there a thought to defining adequacy? Because bearing in mind, you are dealing with a board of directors composed of lay volunteers, and I'm concerned that they may not understand what the requirement of adequacy means. So potentially fleshing that out. When it comes to the financial hardship allowance, the 2/3 vote, is there a consideration for potentially including a provision which would require them, once the deferral period is over, to catch back up with the funding plan, even if it's staggered over several years after the funding, the deferral period ends? Say they have to up the contribution by 25% year 1, 50 in year 2, so that within a certain number of years, they have caught back up with their funding plan. And within the list of essential services, I would include mechanical as well, to cover the HVAC equipment, because that would be part of the essential services. And then finally, when it comes to the methods of funding that they're supposed to consider, and this could become a hot potato, but I'll put it out there anyway, potentially requiring them to choose one as opposed to consider all 4. And I'll leave that for the committee to discuss. But and then finally, if they borrow from reserves, should they be required to pay them back? And should that be addressed here? Because that does happen from time to time, particularly, like, for example, if we have a particularly heavy snowfall year and their snow removal budgets get busted wide open, many associations do have to borrow from reserves to make up operating deficiencies. And if they do that, are they required to pay the reserves back within a period of time? And should that be here? That's all I had.
Thank you, Mr. Silverman. We will have this discussion within the subcommittee. that borrowing aspect from the reserve funds, I, yeah, okay.
I understand. I understand where you're coming from. I do.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
Mm.
The funding methods, it was implied, which is part of the problem, that you do have to choose one. Yeah, and quite frankly, I didn't include any of them in previous legislation on purpose.
Right.
That
I
was
do.
my mistake. I did not, I did not get specific in my specificity like my grandpa told me to do.
Right.
All right, and we'll take into account your other suggestions as well in the subcommittee. Thank you,
Thank
Mr. Chairman. I see that Ms. Strawn has her hand up. Ms. Strawn?
Thank you. I apologize. Let me put my video on. There we go. The bill says, for example, on page 13, line 17, reserves may not be used for purposes other than those specified in the funding plan. So I think that prevents the idea of borrowing from the reserve study.
That was my intent as well, yes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chair, just for clarifications, as we talked about before, that some of these associations have reserve studies, and then they also have an operating budget. And for something like a snow removal, we would hope that they use their operating budget and not their reserve funds, correct?
100% correct. You're right. Operating is snow removal. Operating, it does not fall under the heading of reserve fund. That's exactly correct. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. All right, ladies and gentlemen, with that, the hour is late. And I know it's a lot to chew upon, which is why I wanted to have this discussion period. Please corner me or Ben or whomever you think might be able to answer your question between now and next week. Unless there's anything else for us to discuss.
Oh, can you hold after we get off being in public? I want to make a request to the members here.
Okay.
That's not like to the whole world.
Okay. All right. So